Mary was deeply disturbed by these words and asked herself what this greeting could mean. My husband Grant accuses me of having an unnatural affection for scary movies. And it is true. I love scary movies. I love scary movies. I love zombie movies especially. And I love the way in which scary movies take you to a place where you don't really think that you can be surprised, and really good ones then surprise you, right? I like movies that are psychologically scary. My mother tells me she almost miscarried me when she saw Psycho, which is probably a part of the explanation. I think I like scary movies because it helps me to feel maybe that life is a little less scary than it really is. Seeing a scary movie on the TV somehow puts all of the truly frightening things that are happening right now into some kind of perspective. This gospel reading is like a scary movie. I know why we like to Photoshop it into a smooth, slightly gauzy outline with a young girl and a pretty angel. But in the first hearing, this is nothing but a terror story. Pregnancy, childbirth, all of that in the first century in Palestine in a peasant village is virtually a terminal illness. So high was the rate of maternal death. And Mary, the particular heroine of this horror film, has no knowledge of men. Betrothed to her intended husband, they're not quite yet married. And so any issue that comes before the wedding is finalized, the marriage is finalized, will result in something like unescapable scandal. Mary is perhaps the only sensible person in this gospel story, certainly much more sensible than the angel, even more sensible than God, because Mary understands what the implications are of this so-called good news. The child that she will bear will be undoubtedly mamzer, a tricky Hebrew word that is usually translated in English as bastard, but carries with it a lot more baggage. A mamzer is not just a child born through a sexual encounter before marriage. A mamzer is a child born by having sex inappropriately, in a way that is unclean, in short. And the mamzer child can never be restored, no matter how hard the family tries. That's why in the primitive village culture of first century Palestine, an unmarried girl was usually put to death, because it at least stopped the scandal in this generation. Jesus the mamzer would not be able to be married to anyone except another mamzer, perhaps a proselyte, a Gentile. His social class would be only above Samaritans, that is to say, among the lowest of the low. And Mary is no idiot. She knows this. So when the angel comes and says to her, "This is going to happen," it is not a gauzy scene. It's a dark, scary story. It's hard to want to step outside of the mainstream. It's hard to live in a space where your social position is taken for granted or discredited or marginalized. And that's precisely where Mary's going to end up, and she knows it. 2 weeks ago, Sarah Miles, my coworker, and I were in Houston, and we traveled all over the state, went to the scariest barbecue restaurant I've ever been to, full of roughnecks and oil hands, old, desiccated cowboys, and I wondered why I was so comfortable there. And it was because I was traveling with a lady. So I actually got to pass as a heterosexual married man. To the point that at the airport coming home, when the woman at the baggage checking counter said, "Is this your wife's bag?" I said, "Yes." Queer folks understand that it's a lot easier to pass as straight, and especially when you're traveling through small towns in Texas. That is just a social phenomenon. Mary knows what it will take to be safe, and it's not having a child this way. So why does she say yes? More importantly, why does God roll this way? Gregory of Nyssa wrote these words, the same question. Why did God take a tedious, circuitous route, submit to a bodily nature, enter life through birth, pass through the various stages of development, and finally taste death? Could he not have remained in his transcendent and divine glory and saved humankind by a command, renouncing such circuitous routes? No. Not if God was to become truly as we are. And that, after all, is what we're looking forward to next week, Christmas. God takes on human nature. That is to say, God knows who we are from the inside out. But more than that, God takes on human nature in the form of a little mamzer child, a little bastard, a person who has no hope of any social advancement, any hope of any privilege, nothing except exclusion. The culture that considered Jesus to be illegitimate considered the same thing about God, and still does to this day, if we think about it. Because the truth is, the Christmas present I would like the most is one that is sanitized and tied up in a neat bow that passes for whatever is convenient. Not the dangerous invitation that always comes whenever God decides to mess with our carefully arranged lives. The angel Gabriel comes to Mary, and he tells her the story that starts in darkness and leads to light. And as we will find out, the punchline of the story, the denouement, is that God says, the way things are just isn't quite good enough. I will be there to bear it, to live it, to love it, to become as vulnerable and as fragile as any of the creatures that I see, as you see around you every day. And finally, at the end, when the baby is born and the light shines, we'll discover something new about Mary. That she is not just a frightened young heroine, a foolhardy soul that says yes to this impossibly difficult invitation, but that she is the temple that contains the fullness of God, the temple from which light and life and immortality flood forever, the temple in which we will discover a little bastard child who will take us all to places where we cannot pass as anything but what we are: human, failing, glorious.